Hello everyone, my name is Udit. This is the second video on a short video series on the portfolio review interview, and today's topic is how to structure your presentation for this interview. This advice applies to pretty much most product designer roles and interviews, although in different companies these roles are often known by different names. So it's known as user interaction designer at Google, it's known as UX designer in Amazon, and so on and so forth. The previous video was on what interviewers look for in this round. So if you haven't seen that yet, please do. It's really important context that will help explain why we are structuring our presentation in a certain way. As a quick introduction, I'm from Prepfully. We offer online anonymous mock interviews that help you get interview practice. You can practice for free with other candidates who are also in their interview journey. You can also practice with interview coaches or just get advice sessions with them. These are coaches who very often worked in your target companies and roles, so they can give extremely targeted feedback on where you're doing things right, what you potentially need to improve on, and candidates generally find this sort of advice super useful in their journey. These are also the experts who help contribute relevant content so that they can give advice at scale, and this video is an example of that. Good then, an approach to creating your portfolio presentation. This approach has been used by several UX designers with a good amount of success, but I'd always caution against just applying it black and white to your use case. I always recommend customizing it so that you can use it to demonstrate your strengths or your skills, or potentially the skills that are very relevant to the job that you're interviewing for. There are 4 sections which I recommend including within each portfolio presentation. Section 1 is a quick introduction, Section 2 is your case studies, the meat of the matter, Section 3 is the conclusion or the summary, and the 4th and final section is an appendix. Very quickly about each section, the intro section is basically an about me section. It should include your current role, your years of experience, potentially any specialization from this work experience that you want to highlight upfront. If you're in college, past experience if you have it through internships, but relevant and interesting projects that you worked on. If you're interviewing for a manager role, include your coverage and scope and the number of people you're managing and your organization. I overall recommend 1 slide for this introduction. Case studies we'll come back to later because that's going to be the bulk of the rest of this presentation and the bulk of what you'll want to also be trying to get across to your interviewer. So it deserves a lot more time. So let's quickly talk about the 3rd and 4th sections first. The 3rd section is the conclusion or the summary. I usually recommend a recap of the case studies and the key highlights that are relevant for this role, ideally also just contained within 1 slide. And when it comes to the appendix, this is a bit of an interesting one because a lot of candidates don't include it, but I generally recommend it really strongly. It should include references that you might have leveraged in your past work. It should also potentially include stuff that you've deliberately deprioritized from your core slides in favor of good readability or easy focus. This content should be at hand in case your interviewers potentially want to review it later or are just curious about other things. And the appendix can also be a really great place to store information that you might want to leverage in questions that you anticipate. Because if you can prepare this content upfront, A, it lets you structure your thoughts, or B, that content is on hand, so if you get asked, okay, but what were the other things you tried, you can show that upfront. Or if you get challenged on, was this really the best possible approach you could have taken for customers who want to access customer support, you can show all the other evidence that you might not want to show upfront because it would involve going too deep into a presentation. And these are just some examples, but I'm trying to demonstrate the value of having an appendix upfront. It allows you to come across as much better prepared than an average candidate. Now then, the case study section, which I skipped over earlier, but which is actually the most critical part of this section. You're typically going to have 2 or 3 case studies, and each should contain 4 subsections, so to speak. The first subsection is an introduction. The second subsection is the product context, so problem statement and the like. The 3rd subsection is the design process, and this is the heart of each case study. And the 4th subsection is the conclusion or impact. Some people combine this 4th section with the 1st or 2nd, and that's totally okay. It depends on what you're also comfortable presenting. Very briefly then, on each of these subsections, the first is the introduction to the case study, so what your role was, who you worked with, but also when this occurred and how long the period was, just helpful information that can allow your interviewers to relate to the problem. The second one then is product context, so the problem statement, who you're solving for, what problems or pain points they had, why it's important, but also at the same time what research you've done to validate this problem and explain why effort is being invested into it, and finally how you're going to track its success. So qualitative or quantitative metrics that can help you measure progress, but also what your approach to iteration might have been. The third subsection, which is the heart then of each case study, is the design process. I generally recommend 1 to 3 slides for this, depending on how much information you want to cover up front. It's really important to be deliberate here. I generally recommend going through the entire funnel of ideation to brainstorming to solution to validation to execution process. There's a lot of stuff you could potentially include here, but be careful about what you choose to show upfront, because it's really easy to go down the rabbit hole and then lose track of the fact that you've also got a lot of other stuff to cover. So a good example of things that can be shown are before or after screenshots. You could also potentially show the outcomes of any research you did. Don't go too much into the process. It's not very useful to say, hey, we got 78 survey results. It's really much more useful to articulate why you did a survey, why that was the right tool, and what the outcomes were that you got from it. So what are the 2 or 3 key insights you got and how that factored back into your design or back into the problem statement that you were originally trying to solve for. So it's important to complete the funnel in this section as often as you can. You could also potentially show interim steps here. So wireframes or high fidelity mockups you created. You could also deep dive into the validation approaches you took, the ones you considered, but then the one you took, always useful context that again shows that it was a deliberate decision each time. But these are good examples of things that are a useful part of this process. I do want to caution, you don't have to cover everything in every case study. I would recommend filtering for what that role seems to be looking for, but B also where you can show your strengths, both the breadth of what you potentially covered, but also the depth of the experience within each project that you decided to take up. Right then, so that then is a summary of one potential way to structure your portfolio presentation. Start with an introduction about yourself, then deep dive into 2 or 3 case studies before moving on to the conclusion of your presentation and then an appendix. Within each case study, have a small intro of its own, have product context before moving into the design process, and then the summary or impact, which you could always also include upfront if you want to keep things simple or short. In the next video, I'm going to provide a checklist of things to do after you've put together the structure and content for this presentation, just to make sure that your last mile preparation is of the highest quality and gives you an edge over other candidates. So wait for that one. In the meantime, if you'd like to practice presenting your portfolio, if you just want some advice from other folks, Prepfully, as I mentioned earlier, supports free mock interviews with other candidates who are also in their interview journey. Or if you just like custom advice from a coach who's literally helped hundreds of other candidates, or a mock interview which allows you to test your readiness level and test your presentation skills, you can also book that on the Prepfully website. I've included a link in the description below. As always, I'll include any other helpful links or context in this description as well. We've got an interview guide on UX designer roles. We've also got deep dives into different nuances of what different companies look for. You've also got a free interview question bank which you can start using for practice and getting an idea of what sort of questions get asked. But I'll also cover some of these topics in future videos. If there's a specific topic you want me to look at, definitely let me know in the comments below, because I know that's something that I can look at in a future video. If you found this helpful, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Good luck, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video in this series.
Thanks for watching the video. If you liked it, please subscribe. Our website is prepfully.com. We've got lots of interview questions there. You can also schedule a mock interview with one of our experts. You can find the link in the description below. All the best from us at Prepfully, and we hope you totally rock your interview.